He is in the same country as one of his kids, but there's no plans to see old mate Harry, are there?
Exactly the way they are. That his son is a and they don't get along anymore. Even though the dad is actually...
The meeting was supposed to settle a quiet question about one of Princess Diana's most treasured collections. Instead, a senior jeweler opened a sealed inventory, spoke Prince George's name, and shattered the room's fragile calm. Harry's expression hardened. William did not move. Then, before anyone could explain the decision, the Duke pushed back his chair, crossed the room, and walked out without saying goodbye. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Prince Harry had entered the private Windsor Castle reception room expecting clarification, not humiliation. The chamber offered privacy. And that mattered, because the discussion concerned Diana's sapphire set. A necklace, earrings, bracelet, and brooch preserved after her death. Across from him sat Prince William, while King Charles remained between the brothers and two senior royal jewelers prepared to confirm ownership. The senior jeweler opened the protected inventory and read from a documented account tied to Diana's private jewelry arrangements. A protected inventory is a controlled record used to identify valuable royal possessions, their history, and the person authorized to receive them. His voice stayed calm as he confirmed that the entire sapphire collection had been left for George to inherit when he reached the proper age. Harry stared at him, then turned toward his brother, as though waiting for William to deny it. Harry felt Archie and Lilibet disappear from the room without ever entering it. To him, the jewels were not only expensive objects. They were a physical connection to the grandmother his children would know only through photographs, stories, and memories passed down by others. His jaw tightened as the jeweler repeated George's name. "All of it?" he asked. The quiet answer came immediately. "Yes." William remained silent, and that silence struck harder than the confirmation. The prince had known George was named in the record, but he had not expected the truth to be delivered with Harry sitting a few feet away. He wanted to explain that the instruction had not been created recently by palace officials. Yet every second he hesitated made his brother more certain that the decision had been hidden from him. The chair scraped violently as Harry seized its back and shoved it away. Charles ordered him to stay, but the Duke crossed the room without turning. The king called his name again. Still, his younger son kept walking. The closing door changed the argument completely. This was no longer about who would own Diana's sapphires. It was about an older promise, a buried wound, and which of her sons had the right to carry her memory into the future. To the palace, the sapphire set represented history, succession, and royal continuity. To Harry, it represented something far more personal. The mother he lost before he was old enough to understand what had been taken from him. To William, however, George's inheritance was not a victory over his brother. It was a burden being placed upon a young boy who had never asked to become the keeper of Diana's legacy. Harry stopped halfway down the corridor and pressed one hand against his mouth. His anger had carried him out of the room, but grief now held him in place. Diana's possessions mattered because they were among the few physical links connecting Archie and Lilibet to the grandmother they had never met. For the Duke, dividing those memories along royal lines felt like dividing his mother herself. William remained beside the table as Charles watched him in silence. The prince was the future king, meaning he stood next in line to inherit the monarch's role and its responsibility for preserving royal history. That duty shaped how he viewed the sapphire set. He believed certain collections had to remain complete, because separating them between several households could destroy both their historic meaning and their place within Diana's story. "I knew he would take it this way," William admitted during the private conversation with his father. His voice carried regret, but not surrender. He insisted that George had not been chosen because Archie or Lilibet mattered less. The collection had been protected as one unit, and he would not apologize for refusing to break it apart, merely to make a painful decision feel equal. Charles studied his elder son before answering. The king could see that William was defending more than jewelry. He was trying to protect George from inheriting a scattered memory, and then being blamed for receiving what remained. Yet the monarch also understood Harry's pain, because rejection often sounded like anger before anyone recognized the grief beneath it. George knew nothing about the arrangement. William had deliberately kept the inheritance from him because he did not want the young prince to see Diana's memory as another royal assignment placed upon his shoulders. The future custodian had never asked for the sapphires, and his father feared that one day the set would feel less like a gift and more like a burden. Harry believed Diana intended her possessions to keep her son's families connected. William answered that the Sapphire collection carried a separate instruction neither brother could simply change. That difference cut to the heart of their conflict. One saw love that should be shared, while the other saw history that had to be preserved. Charles finally lowered his voice and warned William that the outburst had begun long before the jewelers entered Windsor. He remembered a forgotten conversation, one that changed the collection from a family keepsake into a symbol of succession. And before the brothers could face each other honestly, that buried moment had to be brought back into the light. Years before the Windsor meeting, one private incident changed the fate of Diana's Sapphire set. It began with a tense family discussion about whether the collection could one day be broken apart, sold, or carried permanently outside the direct royal line. One conversation followed. By the time it ended, George's future had become tied to jewels he had not yet inherited, and to a conflict he could never have imagined. Diana had worn the sapphires during deeply personal and public moments, giving every piece a meaning far beyond its value. After her death, the collection was placed in secure storage, while questions grew over which jewels were private belongings and which had become historic royal assets. A royal asset is an item preserved because of its connection to the monarchy, not simply because of who once owned it. That distinction would later decide everything. Charles raised the issue during a private 2014 meeting at Kensington Palace, shortly after George's first birthday. The documented account of that conversation recorded the king warning William that the set could eventually be divided among several households if no clear instruction was created. He feared that once separated, the necklace, earrings, bracelet, and brooch might never be reunited. The prince listened in silence, but the warning struck something deeper than duty. William placed a small velvet case on the table and said the collection should remain complete for Diana's first grandson in the direct line. The direct line means the branch of the family through which the crown passes from monarch to heir. His words were careful, yet the meaning was final. Charles rested one hand on the case, paused, then closed it. He agreed that the instruction should be preserved. Harry knew nothing about that meeting at the time. When he later learned of it through a private family account, his hurt became immediate and personal. He did not hear concern about preservation. He heard proof that William had already begun dividing their mother's memory between the heir and the spare. His absence from the discussion felt like a judgment made before Archie or Lilibet had even entered the story. The jewelers then received orders to authenticate and catalog the entire set under one protected succession entry. Authentication means confirming that each piece is genuine, while a succession entry records who will eventually receive responsibility for it. That step prevented any jewel from being gifted, removed, or separated without formal authority. Diana's earlier personal notes had mentioned preserving important collections for future grandchildren, but they had not named George. The final arrangement was formalized after her death by those managing the estate, with William's 2014 request becoming the decisive trigger. Now Harry understood exactly when the line had been drawn. He returned toward the Windsor room, carrying no uncertainty, only betrayal, and this time he intended to force William to answer, without hiding behind silence. Harry returned without an aide, without an apology, and without any intention of sitting down. William was waiting beside the table, where the Sapphire inventory remained open. Charles tried to speak, but his younger son raised one hand and stopped him. This confrontation belonged to the brothers. Years of grief, rivalry, and resentment had narrowed into one question Harry could no longer hold back. "When did you decide your son mattered more than mine?" Charles had sent a private secretary into the corridor with one message: leaving would not change the authenticated inheritance instruction. A private secretary is a senior royal aide, trusted to carry sensitive messages and manage official matters. Harry heard the warning, rejected its authority, and came back anyway. He had not returned to discuss procedure. He had returned to demand an answer. William turned toward the jewelers and asked them to leave with the palace staff. The prince wanted no witnesses, because whatever happened next would not be about jewelry records or royal rules. It would be about two sons standing inside the shadow of the same mother. When the door closed, Harry stepped across the room and placed one hand on the table between them. "You turned her into property for the direct heir," Harry said, staring at his brother. "The direct heir is the person next in the family line, expected to inherit the crown." William's voice stayed low, but the control in it was beginning to crack. He said he had protected the set, not his status, because once the pieces were separated, Diana's most important collection might never be whole again. Harry spoke Archie's name, then Lilibet's. He asked why they should grow up knowing George received the collection most closely tied to their grandmother. William answered that inheritance could not be rewritten every time the family suffered another wound. The words were harsh, and he knew it. Still, he did not take them back. William then revealed the truth through a documented family arrangement he had proposed years earlier. He had tried to preserve Diana's personal keepsakes, private letters, and less formal jewelry for all her grandchildren. Those items carried no succession restriction, meaning they could be shared without breaking the protected Sapphire set. Harry listened until Catherine's name entered the conversation. William explained that she had supported setting aside a small sapphire charm from a separate collection for Lilibet. Catherine had wanted the gift to create a personal link between grandmother and granddaughter, but the plan had stopped when relations between the two households collapsed. Harry slowly removed his hand from the table. He stepped back and said a replacement gift would only prove the original exclusion. William's expression changed, but he refused to surrender the sapphires. Charles finally moved between them. The king declared that neither brother held final authority over the collection. A binding legal instruction, he warned, controlled every piece, and what it contained would end the argument whether either son accepted it or not. Charles did not raise his voice. He lifted the authenticated record, placed it between his sons, and explained that the Sapphire set was no longer open to negotiation. The collection had been legally preserved as one historic unit, with George named as its future custodian. Harry had returned ready to fight William's judgment. Instead, he discovered that his brother could not give away the jewels even if he wanted to. Charles kept one hand on the record as he explained the protected family arrangement. Such an arrangement is a binding system used to keep important royal possessions together and within the senior line of succession, the branch through which the crown passes. The rule existed because the set carried more than private value. Once divided, its history could be weakened, its pieces separated, and Diana's connection to the collection reduced to fragments. The king then turned to the jewelers' documented account. Their duty was not to choose who deserved the sapphires. It was to verify every piece, maintain the chain of custody, meaning the official record of who held and protected each item, and confirm the future recipient named in the instruction. The process sounded cold, but its purpose was simple. No private argument could quietly change the collection's fate. Charles read the decisive clause aloud. His voice remained steady until the final line. Then he removed his glasses and placed them beside the record. He looked tired, not victorious. The monarch understood that the words had settled ownership, but they had done nothing to settle the grief standing on either side of the table. Harry accused his father of hiding behind procedure. He said rules were being used to make exclusion appear honorable. Charles answered that changing one protected instruction would create a precedent, meaning an example others could later use to challenge every historic family collection. The king insisted that one act of sympathy could open years of conflict. William looked away when George's name was repeated. The prince could already hear how the story would sound outside the room. One grandson chosen, 2 others left behind. He asked that no public statement make his son appear responsible for a decision created by adults. George knew nothing of the arrangement, and he should not inherit blame with the jewels. Charles then revealed through the same authenticated record that George would not receive unrestricted ownership. He could not sell, divide, or privately dispose of the set. He would inherit responsibility for preserving it. The king also confirmed that Archie and Lilibet remained beneficiaries of other private possessions connected to Diana, though none carried the same historic weight. Harry rejected the distinction. To him, lesser keepsakes could not erase the message sent by the Sapphires. He warned that once he left Windsor, the palace would lose control of how the decision was understood. The legal answer was final. The emotional damage was not, and beyond the locked room, the fallout was already beginning. By evening, the argument had reached the one person William had tried hardest to protect. George noticed the tension before anyone spoke. His father missed dinner, Catherine received a hurried call, and palace aides began moving with unusual urgency. The young prince did not know the full story, but he heard enough to understand that his grandmother's jewelry had made Harry leave in anger, and that his own name stood at the center of it. Harry departed Windsor without attending the planned family dinner. His security team received instructions to prepare an immediate return to London, while palace officials began drafting a private explanation in case details of the jewelers' meeting reached the press. A palace statement is an official message used to control facts before rumors grow. This one mattered because a family dispute could quickly become a public battle over Diana, inheritance, and the treatment of her grandchildren. George waited at Adelaide Cottage, sensing that something was wrong. When Catherine entered, he asked why his uncle was angry with him. The question stopped her cold. She knelt beside his chair and told him immediately that he had done nothing wrong. The princess repeated it slowly, making certain he understood. No jewel, no argument, and no adult decision could make him responsible for Harry's pain. William returned home carrying the weight of that exact fear. The prince had wanted to protect Diana's collection, yet his decision had placed an emotional burden on his son. Catherine told him that the inheritance could not be presented as ownership. It had to be explained as stewardship, meaning the duty to preserve something for others, rather than possess it above them. George should one day understand that the Sapphires belonged to the family's memory, even if he became their guardian. Harry spoke privately with Meghan by telephone during the journey from Windsor. He told her the confirmation proved Archie and Lilibet would always be treated as less important. The Duchess listened as his anger hardened into determination. He no longer wanted a quiet explanation. He wanted the decision challenged in a way the palace could not ignore. Then the danger widened. A senior aide discovered through a recorded call log that someone outside the meeting already knew Harry had stormed out. The leak meant the confrontation could become public within hours, with George's name dragged into a story he barely understood. William entered his son's room later that night and sat at the edge of the bed. He promised George that no jewel would ever matter more than his relationship with his family. The boy listened, still troubled, and the prince realized procedure had failed. Only one path remained. William would have to face Harry without officials, lawyers, or jewelers between them, and speak not as the future king, but as a brother. There were no jewelers in the room this time, no aides, no legal records, and no father standing between them. William met Harry in a small private sitting room before the Duke left London. For several moments, neither brother spoke. The anger remained, but something had changed. The prince was no longer defending an inheritance. He was trying to stop George, Archie, and Lilibet from inheriting the bitterness that had divided Diana's sons. William had requested one final conversation and made one condition clear: no palace representative would attend, and no official account would be created. A palace representative is an aide authorized to witness or manage royal discussions. This meeting had to exist outside that structure, because rules had already failed to reach the pain beneath the argument. Harry agreed only after receiving a private message explaining that George had asked whether his uncle was angry with him. The words reached him more deeply than Charles's warning or the jeweler's confirmation. When William repeated the question aloud, the Duke's expression softened for the first time. He had wanted the palace to feel the force of his anger. He had never wanted a child to carry it. William told him that George now believed the Sapphires had caused the family to turn against itself. The prince admitted that his son felt responsible for a decision made before he could understand its meaning. Harry looked down and said the boy must never be blamed. In that moment, the argument stopped being about who had received more. It became about what the next generation might be forced to carry. Harry then admitted the collection had never been only about wealth. He feared Archie and Lilibet would grow up in California with stories of Diana, but almost nothing they could touch, preserve, or pass on. To him, a physical keepsake meant proof that their grandmother's love had reached them across time and distance. William answered with his own confession. Preserving the Sapphire set had given him a sense of control over a loss he had never accepted. Dividing it felt like losing another piece of their mother. The future king finally admitted that duty and grief had become tangled together, until he could no longer separate preservation from fear. William then offered access to Diana's private jewelry archive, a protected collection of personal pieces not restricted by succession rules. Harry could help select meaningful items for Archie and Lilibet when they were older. He also secured a written family commitment stating that all 4 grandchildren would be taught the Sapphire's history and allowed to see the set privately. Harry reached the door, placed his hand on the knob, and paused. "George must never be blamed," he said. "He won't be," William answered. Their understanding remained fragile. Outside that room, however, the leak was already spreading, and the world was about to turn one family wound into a public verdict on the monarchy. By sunrise, the private Windsor confrontation was no longer private. Harry's departure, the jeweler's confirmation, and George's inheritance dominated broadcasts across Britain. The story had become more than a dispute over sapphires. It was now a national argument about Diana's memory, royal birthright, and whether the children of 2 estranged brothers should inherit the consequences of decisions made before they could understand them. The palace moved quickly, but not quickly enough. Officials confirmed only that Diana's sapphire collection had a protected future custodian, and refused to discuss the brothers' private exchange. A protected custodian is the person trusted to preserve an important collection without treating it as unrestricted personal property. The wording was careful, because one wrong sentence could make George appear victorious and Archie and Lilibet appear rejected. Commentators divided almost immediately. Some defended the decision, arguing that the historic set would lose its meaning if the pieces were separated. Others insisted that Diana's grandchildren should have shared equally in her legacy. The debate grew louder because the jewels carried emotional weight far beyond money. They represented belonging, memory, and the painful question of who remained closest to the late princess. Outside Kensington Palace, a crowd gathered near Diana's memorial gates. One woman stepped forward and placed 4 blue ribbons beside the flowers, one each for George, Charlotte, Archie, and Lilibet. The simple gesture spread across broadcasts within minutes. It captured what official language could not. The public wanted Diana's memory to connect the children, not divide them. A major morning newspaper pushed the conflict even further. Its front page showed an empty chair beneath the headline, "Harry Walks George Inherits Diana's Sapphires." Catherine saw the page beside a photograph of her son, and immediately instructed aides to remove every copy from areas the children might enter. The princess refused to let George discover his family's pain through a headline designed to turn him into a symbol. Harry watched a broadcaster describe his walkout as jealousy. The Duke's anger returned at once. He had spoken about Archie and Lilibet, yet the public version reduced his fear to resentment toward George. Meghan heard his frustration during a private telephone call and reminded him that silence would allow others to define his motives. William authorized a carefully worded palace statement. It declared that the set would be preserved in Diana's honor, and that no child should be blamed for its destination. The prince sent the final sentence to Harry through a private message before release. Harry approved it. For the first time since the confrontation began, both households supported the same public words. The headlines would fade, but one decision still remained. George could inherit a valuable collection, or he could inherit a duty powerful enough to outlast the anger it had created. The final decision did not change. Diana's Sapphire set remained destined for Prince George. Harry did not receive the collection, William did not surrender it, and Charles did not rewrite the protected instruction. Yet the confrontation changed what the inheritance meant. It was no longer presented as a prize for the senior heir. It became a responsibility, one that had to preserve Diana's memory without diminishing the grandchildren outside the direct line. Charles formally confirmed, through the authenticated inheritance arrangement, that the complete collection would pass to George at the designated age. An authenticated inheritance arrangement is a verified family record that identifies who will receive and protect specific possessions. The king refused to alter it, because breaking the instruction would weaken the safeguards surrounding every historic item placed under similar protection. William then established a private family protocol around the sapphires. A family protocol is an agreed set of rules guiding how important possessions may be handled and shared. The prince required that the collection remain available for commemorative occasions honoring Diana, and never be treated as George's personal trophy. Preservation would not become superiority. Custody would not become exclusion. William later brought his son into a quiet family room and showed him a photograph of Diana wearing the sapphires. He explained that inheriting them would mean protecting her story for Charlotte, Archie, Lilibet, and every relative who carried part of her memory. George listened carefully before asking the question that settled the family's deepest fear. Would Archie and Lilibet be allowed to see the jewels? Yes, William answered. The prince made clear that keeping the set whole did not require shutting anyone out. George would become its guardian, but Diana's grandchildren would remain connected to its history. Harry accepted that the sapphires would not pass to his children. The Duke left with a firm written commitment that Archie and Lilibet would receive personal keepsakes and full access to their grandmother's private legacy. He also accepted that George had taken nothing from his cousins. Adults had shaped the inheritance long before any of the children could understand its meaning. Harry and William finally faced the truth neither brother had wanted to admit. Both had used Diana's possessions to defend themselves against grief they had never fully resolved. The future king had protected the collection because division felt like another loss. His brother had fought the decision because exclusion felt like losing their mother again. William preserved the sapphires. Harry forced the family to confront the pain surrounding them. George inherited a duty, not a victory. The collection remained whole, but the meaning of legacy changed. Diana's memory could rest with one custodian, without belonging to only one branch of her family. There was no hidden decision left, and no final confrontation waiting behind another door. Harry walked away without the sapphires. George remained their future guardian, and the monarchy learned that inheritance carries meaning only when memory is protected, without turning love into a contest. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.